Well, welcome. We are so excited to look out and see this many people, this many men and women wanting to know and talk about how to best shepherd and care for women in your local congregations. So thanks for being here. I'm Courtney Doctor. I'm the Director of Women's Initiatives at the Gospel Coalition, and I'm going to let Melissa and Vanessa introduce themselves.
I'm Melissa Kruger. This is bad. Okay, we're really tired, so just be prepared for what this session might be. I'm the VP of Discipleship Programming for the Gospel Coalition.
And I'm Vanessa Hawkins. I'm the Director of Community Life for Redeemer Lincoln Square in New York City, as well as one of the Keller Center Fellows.
And we have known each other for over a decade, so this is really sweet to be able to do this together because the three of us have been doing women's ministry in and out of each other's lives for quite a while, so it's a joy to be able to be here with you. And what we're hoping is that there will be enough time at the end to just hear from you all what you're interested in hearing about. So that's why the two microphones were just set up. So we're going to try and get there. So if there's something that you're really eager, I always say it's not a Q&A, it's a Q&R, question and response, because we don't necessarily have the answers, but we will respond to what you bring us. But we are assuming that you're here because you care about shepherding well, shepherding the women in your congregations well, no matter what your role is in that. And like I said, we're excited that you're here to discuss that. So why don't we start by you each telling a little bit about what your history in women's ministry, your experience in ministering to women has been.
Yeah, so I guess my first entree into women's ministry was as an intern for Kirk of the Hills in St. Louis. And that was really sweet because I was coming out of a context where women's ministry was done much differently, and it was a very egalitarian church. And coming into women's ministry, I had my own doubts about how did I feel about it? Because honestly, I think of myself as probably the person that you would least expect to lead women, because I just did not like women's ministry, because in my mind it soft-served women the gospel, and so I just didn't like it. And so being an intern, the Lord began to get a hold of my heart, and it went from I got to do women's ministry to I get to do women's ministry. I get to serve women in this way. And so the Lord got a hold of my heart in that internship. And since then, I've had the opportunity to build women's ministry and to assist other people in building women's ministries. And so it's been a delight for me. Yeah.
I first started working at my church in children's ministry, which is a way you get to know a lot of women in the church. And sometimes you see them with their tears and in their hardest moments when they're dropping that child off at the nursery at church. But I worked at my church for 10 years in my local church in women's ministry. And it was just a real joy to have that season of in the local church, day in and day out, just getting to talk to women, getting to teach women, getting to really help our session and by session elders and deacons care for women in the church. And then I work for TGC and I get to do this all the time. Yeah, it's great.
And mine's similar. I was on staff at a church. Before that, I helped serve in women's ministry for a long time, just as a lay leader, teaching and choosing curriculum and caring for women, and then on staff at a church, and now thinking about what's happening in women's ministry in local churches around the world. So it is a joy. What are some ways that you have been well cared for by ministry leaders, by pastors and shepherds and elders and other director of women's ministry?
I can say there have been so many ways, first of all. I have worked with so many wonderful men through the years who really want to do a good job of shepherding women. And so I'm going to give one way that I think is something that you experience as a woman sometimes, but maybe hasn't always been stated. And it is the men in my life who have had a ministry of seeing women versus watching women. And so there's a big difference in that type of ministry. And so I can remember my college pastor, David Bowen at Good Shepherd, when I was in college. I always felt seen by him. He would know my name. He would he would know my major. I can even remember in that church, I was a college student. I think I had joined the church. I remember we still had voicemail, a real one you press, whatever that was called back then. And I remember getting a call.
Answering machine.
An answering machine.
An answering machine,
That was
yeah.
That thing.
Yeah. That came out of nowhere.
Yeah, that was back in the dark ages. I can remember getting a call from my elder saying, I just want you to know we're praying for you, and I'd love to know any way specifically I can be praying for you. You know, I was like, the church is great. Look at what they're doing. I mean, it was really this, we see you, and we want you as a member to feel really loved and a part of this church. And to compare that to a watched ministry, I've had situations where I've felt watched, where I've had that a little bit like, we're a little bit suspicious of you. Why are you so into this ministry thing? You know, what are you doing here? Rather than, we're so glad you're eager to participate in the life of the body. Yeah, we're so glad, but it can be a little bit more, you know, are you doing everything right? Or maybe you even feel a little bit of pit. The only time you're called is when you're in trouble. A little bit of that. That's what I call this watched ministry. So I think the shepherds I've seen do it well. They really see the women in their church and they seek to care for them.
Yeah, I can think of lots of ways too, just as you're saying. I think one of the first ways, I think about Dr. Phil Douglas and being in his class. And Dr. Douglas would take the entire roster and he would get pictures. He would have all of our pictures and he would pray for us so that when he saw us, he knew us by name. And so he was always able to engage us. And so I always knew he was praying for us. So that was one of the ways I just felt immensely cared for and I felt seen. I felt seen by, in particular, Courtney's dear husband is I call him my brother, and Craig's my big brother. And so we have that type of relationship that I know that Craig will encourage me and we encourage each other. And I'm strengthened by that relationship, and it really is like a sibling relationship, and I just love that. That's super helpful and encouraging to me. And then others, like for instance, just pastors that I've had the privilege of serving on staff with who have seen my gifts, called them out, and pushed me in the back and say, you should be doing more with this. That has been the biggest and the richest of blessings. Yeah.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I agree. It was a pastor that first invited me to teach. It was our pastor that said, yes, you should go to seminary. And even currently, I've had recently a pastor show up to his women's retreat where I was teaching on a Friday night and a Saturday, 3 sessions. And he sat through the entire retreat and took notes. He was not watching. He was not suspicious. He had a posture of just partnership in the gospel. And I thought, man, what the women in his church are seeing right now is incredibly beautiful because they, by seeing him do that, will feel very welcomed and known. And so, yeah, there's just been a lot of ways.
Powerful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Really
I know.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the best practices then that you've seen? And we've been hinting around them, but what are some of the best practices that you've seen as pastors shepherd the women in their care? What are some of the things that they've tangibly done that have been helpful?
Wow, I think what has been really notable is when I see pastors reach out and include women in the care of women. That is just always remarkable. That is always just super helpful because there are just certain situations in which women are, you know, honestly, just they're better suited to care for women in certain situations, and it's just more it's easier to relay some things and to lay yourself bare before a woman on some things. And so to include, for pastors to be sensitive enough to know that, you know, I need to leverage the women in my church to include them to care for other women is a mature and a very wise pastor, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen churches do this really well. I remember talking to one pastor about it. I say, especially if it's a really tender issue, and honestly, when a woman's going before a bunch of elders or a session, it's normally a very tender issue.
Intimidating.
Yes, and I say it's for her, it's like she has cancer and is going to the doctor. And, you know, often if that's your diagnosis, you take a friend with you.
Right.
Because, yeah, the doctor's the authority. The doctor's going to do your care, but I need that friend there to remind me what the doctor said, because she is in deer in the headlights at that moment. So it's not that if Vanessa's with me, she's not the doctor, she's not the one taking care, but she's going to remind me what the doctor said. So the pastors and the elders, they're there, they're going to care for her, but this person can come alongside and remind. So I think that's really helpful. Another way I've seen systemically the church do this well is when the elders of the church meet with the women's leadership team, maybe 2 or 3 times a year on a regular basis. And they have good conversations where the elders are actually saying to the women leaders in the church, hey, what's going on? What do y'all see that we're not seeing? And this is why I believe in this so strongly. It's because I'm a complementarian. I actually believe men and women are unique and different and made in the image of God all at the same time, and that we desperately need each other.
Absolutely.
I need my brother's perspective, and I think our brothers need our sister's perspective. So we've actually got to get in the room together at sometimes and just have those conversations, because sometimes, like, all the women know, hey, the picnic was at 3. The reason no one came is because all the children were napping. And, and they can just tell the elders that. It wasn't that they didn't want to come. It just was the timing was off. And you just need to have those conversations as a family.
Yes.
So that the family can all be well taken care of.
Absolutely.
I've even had multiple times where pastors will have a sermon review committee and have women on it, either before they read the sermon and talk about it ahead of time, which is wisdom, or afterwards. And it's just having women speak into, man, it's been 6 weeks of football illustrations, it's like, I got your back, brother. Like, you probably ought to try another illustration. And so just having people speak into, or some of the more difficult passages. I've had pastors send me their sermon ahead of time and say, I'm preaching on David and Bathsheba. How does this hit you? And asking your sisters and your mothers in the body of Christ to participate in that, because I agree with you. We need each other desperately. So best practices, I love that. We might come back to that. What are the various aspects? So if somebody were, like me, a note taker, and they want to have, like, what 4 things do I need? What are the essential aspects that I need to be thinking about as I am caring for women well?
I'm going to let you start there, Melissa.
The essential aspects. Okay, well, let me just start. I think every essential aspect, the easiest way you can have a ministry that cares for women in your church is to have a prayerful ministry. If the elders are praying well for the whole church, every member of the church, and I really believe in this, it is not unspiritual to communicate that. I know sometimes you want to be like, oh, I'm supposed to pray in my closet and not let anybody know what I'm doing, and I get it. But it means the world when you just come to a woman and say, hey, we were going through our prayer list this week, and you were on my prayer list. I just want you to know I'm lifting you up before God. That's a huge thing, and I think it is overlooked. I think the basic spiritual disciplines are overlooked. We would also say, honestly, taking the time to preach the word well to the whole congregation, that also cares well for women. I want my pastor to spend a lot of time in the Bible. That is a gift to me, that he spends time in research, that he goes to conferences like this and gets his heart refreshed so that he can come back and refresh. Because the preached word is manna for us all. It's a means of grace to us that you give to us. So, the word and the prayer. And then I think really getting your session and your elders equipped on a regular basis on how to care for the whole congregation. Maybe it's you go to some seminars on it, but just really thinking through what is spiritual care, what does it look like, that continual ed training. I feel like those things sometimes get overlooked. We assume that we know how to do things, and there really are people who are excellent at this and who can help us do it better. So I think whether it's reading a book on it, whether it's going to a conference and receiving hey, how should we care well for the women in the church? And then I would say also just always enlisting the help of women, which we've talked about, just asking for a feedback loop. Hey, how are we doing this well? What are you hearing that we're not doing well? Just having those conversations. I like to think of my family as a microcosm of what the church family should be looking like. So that's what my husband would do. How are we doing? And that's a normal conversation we should be having kind of as men and women in the church.
Yeah, and I would put a fine point on including women in the care of other women. Have them to come alongside, but don't outsource shepherding women. Don't outsource it. It can be really tempting, I think, that if you've got some women who are caring really well, to just kind of silo them and allow them to just do the care of women while the elders just care for men. That's a really unhealthy approach. It should be a shared work. Right. It should be a shared work and caring well for the family of God. And so making sure that women are included, but that it's not outsourced to them, I think is really key.
I love that. It reminds me of, so caring for the women in your church and making sure that, another woman is present if it's we're not bringing her in by herself, but then also not outsourcing it. It reminds me of when you and I were working together in St. Louis. The deacons at this particular church started an annual tradition, the week of Valentine's Day. The deacons, not their wives, the deacons would put on a dinner for all of the widows and unmarried and just the single women in the church, and sit with them and have conversations, because I know a lot of my single friends have said before, I just like the perspective that my brothers can bring me sometimes. I like that particular vantage point. And so that's the not outsourcing, or you and Craig, it's just this precious friendship, and it's a brother-sister relationship. But the deacons would have this dinner, and then they would get to know the women and then remind them that if these women needed anything, in particular, if they had somebody coming over to their house to do service work, and maybe it was an older woman who didn't feel comfortable with that, or had some questions about, I don't know if I'm being taken advantage of with my roof repair, the deacons would say, we can come be there, we can help, and so we are your resource in that. But that they created a space for the relationships and the conversations to happen. I just thought it was one of the most beautiful ways to care for this particular demographic of women in our church.
Courtney, can I also add? I think it can also be easy that if a woman is married, you particularly name women who are unmarried or divorced, and that was it was absolutely incredible and just beautiful to watch that ministry. I loved that they did that. It was very much family. You can call on your family when you are in need of a man to be present, and so that was super helpful. But I would also say with married women, sometimes if you're not really attentive to how contacts are being made, it can just get to elders calling the husband. And so, and just assuming that he knows what's going on with the family. And so it's hard to just care well for the entire family if you're only talking to the husband.
That's good.
And so it's really important. When I think of shepherding, when I think of Jesus as the shepherd of the sheep, that's tender. There's a knowing that happens with that you can't do through somebody. You've got to know the sheep.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I love that. So we have named several ways that we have seen this done really well, and ways that we've experienced really good care in our churches. But what we want to talk about too is, what are some ways that you've seen damage or hurt or harm to women in the local church, instead of the care and support and encouragement that we're talking about? And then let's don't just leave it there, but also what could have been done differently in those situations that would have turned it into a positive, caring, supportive encounter.
One kind of subtle one that I do want to address, because I think what you just said about kind of only shepherding the men and assuming it will trickle down. I actually think that can be really problematic.
Yes.
In a lot of ways. But I think there's also, at times, just complete indifference to what's happening in the women's ministry. So that means, and I think it's actually really dangerous because, you know, the curriculum that's being studied is never even talked about, you know, and so a lot of bad theology can seep in through whatever curriculum's picked because no one's paying attention. Oh, it doesn't matter because the women are just doing it. That's kind of like saying, well, half of my body, it doesn't matter what I do with it. You know, I mean, think about that. I'll be honest, if I stub my toe, I'm like, that is the worst pain in the entire world sometimes. You know, it's just your toe and you know it's going to be okay. But if half of our body isn't working, we have a huge problem. Yeah. And so it's if we chose not to wash half of our body or take care of half of our body, we would not like the whole body.
Right.
You know, it's so much. It affects everything. And I think we have to be really careful that I think sometimes women can be seen as, oh, well, that's good, you're doing something, rather than necessary and needed. Every part of the body matters. And so when there's this indifference, sometimes it can foster, if you do something, that's good, but you know, we really got it here. And I think that's one of those subtle ways that there could be a lack of care.
I think having an awareness a self-awareness that I'm going to have bias over categories of difference. So if you know, that's whether it's my womanness, whether it's my ethnic, identity, over categories of difference, just know that if someone is in a different category, you're going to have some biases. And so just being aware of that, and so being softer towards the person in that area, just knowing and having awareness that you are going to have bias. And so I have seen women hurt by that because it's the suspicion instead of belief for what's being said. And so if there's no belief, then there's no compassion, and it just doesn't allow us to act like the body.
Can I give an example of that?
Please do.
I had a woman in the church call me one time. She and her husband were in a tough marriage spot. There was nothing abusive. There was nothing like that. It was just they had really grown not to like each other very much. And so the elders were meeting with them on a regular basis to try to help their marriage. And she said one night they had kind of one of those conversations where they both told them really hard things because both were having issues. And she said, so, you know, they told me my hard things and they told him his hard things. And they were, you know, she said they were right. For both of us. She didn't have a problem with being told the hard things. But then that week, one of the elders called her husband to check in on him and took him to a baseball game, you know, just to kind of make sure he was okay. And because there had been no woman in the room, there was no woman to do kind of that same thing to her. You know, so she was left feeling like, oh, he's getting kind of that, I know we told you a hard thing and now we're just gonna make sure the relationship's okay. And there wasn't really an appropriate way to do that for her. So just making sure that even the care is similar can be a big thing.
Yeah.
That's really good, Melissa.
So see the women, know what's going on. I think that even going back to that, I've heard different people say, you know, read the books that the women in your congregation are reading, because there are some books out there that are shaping and forming popular culture, and it's important to have a grasp on what and that's as a woman's ministry leader or a man in the church as a ministry leader, to know what is shaping and forming the people in our congregation, and specifically the women. So what are some ways that if being seen is important, and I would just affirm that in every way. I had a ministry leader one time, he was out the door and my office was right by the door, and he stopped and he came back and he leaned his head in, and he's a godly, wonderful man. But he said to me, Courtney, you are doing a great job. He goes, I don't actually know what you're doing, but I hear it's great. And he walked out, and I thought, to be seen is huge. It's part of my story. I want to be known, and it was really hurtful. And he was trying to be helpful. You know, he was trying to be helpful. So to be seen is important. We're establishing that. So what are some ways that women can be overlooked, and what are some ways to make sure that they're not? What are some ways that we all can see the women that are in our ministry spheres?
Yeah, I think you have to, I mean, leaders have to really think, particularly pastors, have to be creative, because I've been on a pastoral staff or two, and to have that one-on-one with the guys, and then for women not to get that same type of nurture and coaching. But I think pastors that I've seen do it well, I've had pastors to take me for a walk in a very public place so that we could talk and I could get the one-on-one, and so it was comfortable for him, but he wasn't satisfied not giving me the development that I needed from him. And so I've seen pastors just have to, think about how to do that well. So I think that part of it is just being intentional about it. How do I care well for even women on my staff, or, whatever the issue is?
One way I've seen really helpful to enter in is to do some training in single-gendered environments. So it matters a lot. Sometimes when both men and women are in a classroom, I mean, this has just been shown, the women won't ask questions. And so that's, they just feel more intimidated in that environment. So one thing we used to do at our church is every quarter, we would actually have some women's training nights, and we would have a topic, and the pastor would come and just teach on that topic. And it was always really interesting because there were a lot more questions, there was a lot more interaction. And it was a great way, really appropriate way for the pastor to invest in the women in his church, to get feedback, to hear their questions, because what they're asking tells you a lot. And so it was this wonderful kind of interaction. I also saw, we used to do outreach Bible studies in all of these different neighborhoods my girlfriends and I would do. And here's what was happening. We were getting asked some theological curveballs because these women had never studied the Bible before. And so we started saying, we're going to hold all these questions. And then every semester we brought a pastor in and we did Ask the Pastor. And so it was a great way. These women wouldn't go to our church, but we brought the pastor to them. And our pastors actually loved this. I mean, they said it was like their favorite thing. And it was so sweet. So they would come in, and it actually made these women then feel more comfortable going to the church because the pastor had come to them first. But the pastor would come in, and he'd get all these curves. Well, how could Eden be perfect if you could sin? I remember that being a long discussion. I'm like, have at it. Here you go. We let the pastor handle that, whatever. And so it was so great. And then they get to see a little bit of what we're doing. And so let me say this to the women in the room, because there are a lot of women in here. Be willing to ask for these things. Sometimes they're very willing, but they don't. Sometimes even the pastors don't want to overstep bounds. So say, hey, we'd love for you to come do this. So think about ways, how can you get men and the women in the same room and maybe invite your pastor into something that would be really helpful.
And sometimes they just simply not thought about it.
Yeah.
I mean, and so many of them would love to engage in that discussion if they knew it was a need.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I would just add this, the same thing that we know time and money, right? Time and money. It's always time and money. So I think when somebody is willing to invest in you with their time and their resources, you know that you've been seen and that you're valued. And so showing up at the Bible study, being willing to have the conversations. But when a church is willing to budget for women's training, whether that is sending a woman to seminary, or whether it's having her do one of our cohorts, or sending her to a conference, a group of women, or saying, this is important enough that our church is going to fund 5 women going to this training event, whatever it is. That really speaks volumes to women. And then identifying, knowing the women well enough to identify which ones are ready to go, and they're eager to maybe learn how to teach, or they're eager to learn how to participate in a mercy ministry, or whatever it is. Are they being seen and prioritized through the calendar and the budget? So we wanted to open up for questions.
So really practically on that, though. we're going to be totally biased here and
Right.
say, I mean, the best place they should come is next summer to TGCW 24.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you really
So-
love
Yeah.
the women and the women in your congregation.
Exactly. So if you love them, a budget to help them get here next summer.
We're actually going to be talking about that in the other room in just a little bit. Yep, June 20th through 22nd. But we actually are really excited about it because the whole purpose, the women's initiatives exists to resource women in the local church. It's why we exist at the Gospel Coalition. And so as ministry leaders in your local context, we are here to think of ways to resource you. So it's why we have produced these cohorts. It's why we, write the books or the articles, and it's why we put on the conference. And as we think about the content of the conference, we're particularly thinking about ways that we can equip and train women for ministry in their local church and in their local context. So even though it's self-serving to say it, we really do mean it. It's a place that if your church could send a group of women, we do prayerfully work very hard at trying to have it be a place where they will go home encouraged and equipped. So we would love to have them. So before we open it up to questions, is there any last piece of just thought or advice or wisdom or encouragement that you would offer as we seek to steward this one half of the body well, and that can be particularly challenging in our context?
One of the things I've seen that has been, two things that I've seen that has been immensely encouraging from pastors for me is to know what's going on with women and their development in your church enough that you're able to promote it.
Yeah.
To know it well enough to be able to promote it, to say that this is what's going on in women's ministry and this is how we're seeing fruit from that. Mm-hmm. That is so much more powerful than a woman standing and saying that. It's really powerful to hear a pastor say that. The other one is imitation. I've started mentoring initiatives in the church that have taken off in a manner that I've had a pastor to come and say, now show us how to do this for men. And so to be a part of the planning so that, and to think and to rethink it and redesign it such that we could do something that gave us some parity, some equality, on both sides, men and women, and to teach and train and encourage and to mentor the whole church in that way. And so that's been really encouraging. So affirm well enough to be able to say, come and help us think about how to create what you've created. That's also really, I think, encouraging.
I've had some pastors in my local area actually call me up and say, hey, could we get lunch and I could just pick your brain about women's ministry? Mm-hmm. I've done it with a lot of church plant leaders. Mm-hmm. And that just meant so much. I was kind of like, oh, wow, you're starting your church plant already thinking about how to do women's ministry. And that spoke volumes to me. I sat down with 3 pastors just a month ago because they were getting ready to hire a woman on staff for the first time in their church. And they sent me the job description and they said, would you mind looking over it and tell us, what you think about it? And I looked over it and I was like, this is for women's job.
Yes.
I was like,
had that discussion before.
Whatever. And so it was really helpful. I said, you want her to be your executive pastor, your teaching pastor, and your care pastor, and it was just they were like, oh, we hadn't even realized. We were expecting of her way more than we might expect of any one pastor. Yeah. And it was easy for me to say it because I wasn't in the game, so to speak. I was just an outside consultant coming in. So sometimes it's just nice to get someone on the outside to look in for you with some perspective and be able to help. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I meet with a lot of the guys that we went to seminary with, and it's just so sweet to be able to speak into it, and they just ask good questions, and it's honoring, but it's exciting, and it's partnership, and I love it. So we would love to see what's on your minds, and again, it's not going to be answers; it'll be a response, but we would love to talk about it.
And if we look a little like we don't understand what's being said, sometimes it's hard to hear from the mics, so we'll see how this goes. We hope it's going to go well.
We're going to be listening.
If we're doing like this,
yes.
Good.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome. Your comment about going on the one-on-one walk was kind of an appropriate and intentional way for a pastor to invest in you as a staff member. Kind of pivoting that thought into pastors' interactions with just women throughout the church and the way they communicate with women at the church. I think there may be a hyper caution. Can I text this person? So fostering that kind of communication being both appropriate and yet intentional, but for people who aren't staff, who they're not with on a day-to-day basis. Any thoughts or advice for pastors who are trying to kind of engage that appropriate but intentional?
I can say it's not easy. I think it's a very great question, and I would certainly say it's not easy, and you're trying to walk a fine line between caring well for the sheep, because that involves some intimacy and some knowing, but also some accountability such that you're caring well for the sheep and staying above reproach, right? And so I think that is definitely, it's prayer every time. It is definitely a wisdom question. And so I don't know, I think it certainly takes people smarter than I am, but people are in your circle, and maybe that's something that your staff and your leadership team helps you to think for. But I think you don't get to just, phone it in and not care for women, but also you don't get to not have accountability. And so it's finding how those two fit together and how that works for your environment. Yeah, I don't know that I have anything prescriptive for everyone.
If I could just say one thing on how to think through, and I do not want to jump into a hornet's nest with the Billy Graham rule, but if I could just say one way to think about that is to remember Billy Graham was a traveling evangelist. He was actually not a pastor of a flock. So just as you're thinking through rules and how to think through, it's helpful sometimes to think, if you're the pastor of a flock, I mean, it made a lot of his rules made a lot of sense when you're traveling the country and you want to look appropriate in a lot of spheres. But we do have to find ways, and here's what I'll say about like email and texting and things like that. I just think it's helpful to remember those are all recorded. So if you do anything inappropriate in that way, there's a record of it. I mean, one
Digital
it's just,
footprint is fierce.
yeah. I mean, it's so I think there's natural accountability. So to me, if you need to email a woman about the church picnic or whatever, I mean, there's a record of what you talked about. Actually, one-on-one, there's no record of what you talked about. So I actually think of email and texting as actually safer in some ways of a means of communication, just because here it is. This is what we said to one another. And so just as you're thinking through ways, I think it's totally appropriate to send an email to every woman in your flock or however you do it and saying, hey, I'm praying for you this week. How can I pray for you? To me is okay. Everyone has to make their own decisions, but those are just some maybe ways to think about it.
But we've also heard from women that, it can be painful when it's an email or a text and the pastor or elder's wife is included on that. You feel like, oh, that's just, it's not, then it's like, well, why did that happen? Like, why did I not feel safe in that? Or, so there's ways to maybe move towards healthy brother, sister, mother, son, father, daughter, relationships, the way the Bible talks about the way we're supposed to relate to each other. Okay, we're going to go back and forth. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, any rule that does not allow a pastor to shepherd a woman well, or doesn't allow a pastor to have a conversation with his flock member, I don't know. I'm going to say that that's not a biblical construct. I'm going to say that that's not biblical.
I don't know if this might, okay, here we go. So Vanessa and Melissa and Courtney, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. And when you just opened up today, some of these, I have 3 quick questions. They could be yes or no answers. Some takeaways that I took just from the opening of the session. One, the fact that you're taking questions from us. My takeaway is in women's ministry, it seems that women like to have everyone involved. Would that be correct or not?
Probably depends on the leadership personality, right?
All right. So thank you for that. And then the response, not a Q&A. I think this is a direct, could be a direct or an indirect, that women don't want mansplaining.
Don't want
mansplaining. That is a true statement. That is a true statement right there. Every woman in the room agrees with that one, yeah.
Thank you for sharing what your backgrounds were. Does this give credence that women want to be recognized as qualified to do ministry in sharing your backgrounds? So,
thank you.
yeah. Would you agree with that?
why we did those things.
Yeah.
So I would say that we gave our backgrounds because you need to know that we've had some experience in this, that we've actually lived in this. We actually didn't talk about academic credentials or anything like that. So I think we were really just saying why are we up here? What have we done to even have any experience in this? The Q&R is just something that I feel deeply. I don't like the power dynamic that can happen with, especially in a room like this where we're doing the predominance of the talking, that we're the experts, and that's just not true. We're all learning together, and so the Q&R is just something that I've become more passionate about in my own, that I'm not the answer person, I'm not the expert.
like that.
So that would be, okay. Thank you. Thanks for asking that.
So our church is a very, very small church, so about 40, 50 on average on Sunday, and that's including kids. So we don't really, at this moment, have a women's ministry. Want to develop that, right? Certainly do. But until we can get the training done for the women and that kind of thing, and I've yet to find anybody that says, yeah, I want to do that. So you're talking about the quarterly trainings, where the pastor would come in and just, on a quarterly basis or what have you, and do that kind of thing. I guess my question is simply, how long are those quarterly trainings? Like, is it just a one night thing, or is this like a successive nights, or like successive weeks for like a month or so? I mean, that's what I was.
Great.
Or was it
Yeah, I would actually meet, I'm sorry, it's my hearing.
Oh, yeah.
I just have one more part
Yes.
to that. Towards women's issues or towards anything, like just anything in general?
That's a great question. So it was actually toward anything. So we would actually meet, my pastor and I, when I worked on staff, we'd meet once a month, but we would plan out the whole year. We'd have 4 a year, so quarterly, because really, honestly, it was in the evening. That's all people wanted to come to anyway. We would pick the topic. So I remember one time we did discernment, and we actually picked a really popular women's book, and we took a popular women's book that had a lot of really bad theology. Actually, my pastor, when he read it, could not believe it. He was like, people publish this in the Christian space, and I was like, yes. And actually what he did, he didn't go through line by line. We had the women read it, and we had them figure out, what was wrong with it. And then he taught on how do we do discernment and different things like that. So we would do different topics. It could be, and it was different every year. It could be evangelism. Hey, how do you share your faith well? So it was a lot of different basic spiritual discipline topics and things like that.
And it's just for one night?
Yeah, it was just one night. It'd be 2 hours. We'd have, of course, we'd have snacks and goodies and all of that.
Ministry of snacks.
I mean,
Powerful ministry.
We would do that, and then it was just a great time. We'd have fellowship time, and then so we also gave him interaction time with the women, just the women in the room, and then we would do whatever the training was on. So thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Would you all be willing to share about a time maybe you have hurt somebody in your flock and how you went about making amends, apologizing? Maybe you were just misunderstood, but I'd love some guidance on that.
Oh, that's great. So as a woman in ministry, when you've been the one to hurt, I have lots of examples of that. So
That's what I was thinking. Which example?
yeah,
do you
exactly. I
want?
know Vanessa's not allowed to answer this one.
Well, it was this time, Courtney. Sorry.
I mean, I'm sure this is going to be really hard to believe, but I could be a little bit of a bull in a china shop. And so, I've got an idea, and by golly, we're going to get the idea done. And so I can hurt people in the process. And so when that becomes it comes to my attention, or I become aware of it, just move towards the person immediately. I mean, I've said this in so many different contexts, but the gospel always moves towards brokenness and hurt, right? That's the direction of the gospel. So whenever there is hurt or brokenness, you just move towards it in humility and honesty and questions and repentance and praying for restoration and conversation. I mean, I think every single time.
Can I share?
Is it me?
The time that Courtney hurt you?
Can I share, Sen? No. I'm thinking of Gather and Grow. And the reason this would be hard to share because you can kind of come off as the hero, so I'm going to share it about her. You went to the whole women's team after that event, and I think you said you had like a negative attitude. Just it's hard when you're planning some of these events. They're always hard. There's always stuff that goes on. And what I was so impressed that Courtney did as a leader is she went to her whole team and she said, I need to apologize to you all. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what she is teaching them in this moment is more formative than anything else that probably happened this weekend, because you were just so humble. And you went before then, you're like, I'm checking myself. I'm sorry I did that. Yeah, and it was something that easily could have been overlooked. I mean, we were just like, oh, we're all stressed or whatever. And you were just.
Most of my ministry has occurred through repentance, just so you know that.
I'm sorry, and I probably shouldn't have shared that, but it
That
was
is not true.
It was so beautiful to see. I hope, please don't. Please, afterwards, she's going to confront me. I'm
She's gonna have to come.
apologize for
No, come
sharing.
We have to go make an announcement together, so we'll see how well we're actually know.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just looking for the last one. So I think the last big one was when I had just moved to New York. I had a couple, a lady who was having some real marital issues. The same day, it was the celebration. My daughter was about to leave town and get ready to head for college. And so it was a lot going on, and I'm still learning how to navigate the city, and so I didn't really know how to get to from where I was meeting this lady who really needed my full time and my attention, and to get to my daughter's thing on time, because I had given my word that I would be there. And so I was just feeling pressed. And so what I generally do in those type of situations is I sit down and I'll tell the person, I'm setting my alarm because I want to give you my full attention for this many minutes. But when my alarm sounds, I have a quick exit. And I failed to do that in my haste. And so my lift was coming, and I had to get to my next thing, and she was kind of in her story in a place where it wasn't convenient to leave. And I had kind of delayed, and so I wasn't fully present, and I felt horrible about it forever. But anyway, so she stormed out. She was really upset with me, and as she should have been. And so I pursued her. I mean, I would text, and she wouldn't respond. She wouldn't respond, and it was okay. But I would continue regularly to text and would say, I'm praying, and would follow up and follow up. And when something like that happens, that person becomes your prayer assignment too, because, well, one, just confession and repentance, but also they become your assignment, that they don't become hardened by what you've done to them, the pain you inflicted. And so, but anyway, long story short, it took months, but I kept pursuing her, and she finally came around when she needed to talk. And so I would just say, man, Jesus pursues us like crazy. And so you got to be willing to, when you hurt people, you got to be willing to say, I'm sorry, and in a meaningful way, and to keep pursuing them. Yeah, that's what I would say.
That was very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And we're gonna try. We try so hard not to hurt God's people, but we do it.
Similar line of thinking. So I'm going to ask this for my husband, because I'm the pastor's wife and I'm traumatized by conflict. So I don't think I could answer him on how to handle this. But what do you do if you find out there is something being taught in women's ministry that's not okay? How do you approach that woman with love? Because I think I would cry no matter what he told me if I was the one in that position. But how do you handle that with grace and love of, I don't like this, what you're teaching, and I don't want you to teach this anymore? How do you handle that?
Can I acknowledge that? I think that you create a culture where you're having those conversations all the time so that it's not a big, scary conversation. And so if you have a culture of you're already talking about what's going on in women's ministry, then there is no, I found out this was happening. It's, this is what's happening in women's ministry because we talked about it. And so it's building a culture that allows you to have those regular check-ins, such that you're not out there, that there's, you're not out there on your own, doing your own thing, but you've got a relationship and those conversations are happening.
So starting at ground zero, basically.
I'm sorry.
So starting at ground zero, basically.
Yeah, it's building, I think building a culture of that.
Yeah, I think that's part of pastoral oversight is
Yeah.
knowing what's happening in the different, and having a say on the front end,
Yes.
right? Like I don't think I ever put a curriculum before. We run everything past leadership and just, yeah, we want different, we need our vantage. But yeah, have him speak into it on the front end is, probably the long-term solution.
And if you're a women's leader, just even for your own covering, make sure you run it by someone. Even, if you're trained in it, seminary trained, whatever, still run it by someone and get leadership's approval, have them to speak into it. Or maybe they're able to even add something or enhance it as this, as a team, as a shared approach to caring for the sheep. Yeah.
And that models that we need each other.
Absolutely.
So it's like, hey, I'd love your eyes on this.
Yes.
That's just a good model
Yes.
both ways for us to be asking them and actually, really pulling at them to be involved in what we're doing. That's a good thing because our ministry to women is better when it's done with men. And I think men's ministry to men is done better when it's done with women.
Absolutely.
That's all involved.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Short. I'm not sure if you can hear me there. So we are in a great congregation where the male personal mentorship is exploding.
Oh, great.
It's beautiful to see, and they're being trained up and sent out. But the female personal mentorship is a little bit lacking. And so could you speak, I think you spoke a little, you mentioned a mentorship initiative. Could you give us maybe some more details, vision for like what that looks like? How do you go forward and
I would just
initiate that?
I would be doing a cheap imitation of Melissa Kruger, who wrote Growing Together. So I'm gonna pitch that one to Melissa.
This was a huge thing for my heart when I came into women's ministry, and it took me 3 or 4 years to finally actually get to implement something that could work. How do you connect women? How do you do discipleship for women in the local church? And I almost want to just direct you. There's so much, but I would just say try to find ways to connect older and younger women, and I would try to connect them seasonally. Do you have older women in your church? Because some churches don't, so I say
have
that.
a great many, but right now the older women, I think, mainly see themselves in a capacity of like a large Bible study. But as far as that life on life personal kind of thing, it's more the youngers and the youngers, the new moms teaching the new moms.
Yeah.
So maybe not so much the seasoned or, widows even teaching the younger.
Well, here's my idea in that situation. I just always warn against saying to an older woman, hey, will you mentor me? That question for us all is like, oh dear, what does she want from me? And I'm terrified, because it's like, what does that mean? Are we linked for the rest of our lives? I don't know. And so what I like to, the question I think that's really wise to ask is, could we get coffee? And could I ask you these 3 specific questions? That's fair to the older woman, and it's less overwhelming. I have sat at coffee with people for 3 hours, and I leave, and I'm like, I don't know why we were here. I don't know what she wanted to talk to me about, and I'm scared. I'm completely scared I failed her. I have no idea why we were here. But when a woman comes to me and says, hey, I really want to talk to you about how you mothered in the young years. Can I ask you these questions? I am there. And I'm like, okay, yes, let's do it. I have an hour and a half. Let's do it. So I think on the younger woman, being creative in how you ask for that is a really helpful thing. I also think it's good to say, hey, there are 4 of us. We really want to be discipled in prayer. Will you walk through this book with us for 9 months, once a month on Tuesday evening at 7 p.m.? We will start at 7, we will end at 9, we will be there, we will have done our homework, we will be on time. Will you do that for us? I think they will say yes. I really do. And so coming with what you need for spiritual growth, I think really can help. But
So I'm kind of, I'm very type A, and so I got that part. But like the other sisters in the church, like I got my questions always ready, and I'm always looking for people. But like my other sisters in the church who maybe don't know how to ask those questions, like, do I talk to our pastors and see? I'm sure our pastors, they're so thoughtful, and I'm sure they're just waiting for somebody else to really like. They like for their people to do the work. They don't want to be the pastors always doing the work for the people, and so like, do I talk to them? How do I get the other? Because I don't think all the younger moms or younger ladies always know what they don't know. They don't know that they even need it. Maybe they think that getting alongside another 19-year-old girl is enough, and that's good in its own way. But we need those who are seasoned in the faith and in life. And how do
You
I
got to
get
resource
them
them.
to
You got to give them the structure to do it. So pick up a book like Growing Together, or have a Saturday afternoon where you say, hey, this can look a lot of different ways, but let's put some parameters on it, and and decide, just define it, equip them, give them resources, and then a compelling reason biblically on why we need to be doing life on life ministry with
Thank you.
each other.
And so,
Yeah.
so one of the things that I did, just as a quick thing, was you got to feed people. I keep telling you about this ministry of snacks. So we would have seriously, I would have a dinner, and I invited every woman in our church, and our church is very young. So we've got some older saints, but we're a very young church. But inviting every woman to come to dinner. And so in that time, trying to give some structure to what mentorship could look like. And a lot of the principles were from Growing Together. But to try to dispel all of the fears that people are going to bring about mentoring, I got a past, or, what do you want from me? And so trying to anticipate what some of those questions are and teach to that. And then also to teach to, mentees. And then to also set the expectation that there won't be enough older women to younger women. And in those cases, we'll do prayer partnerships, and we'll be responsible for each other's discipleship. We'll be accountability partners and help each other grow. And so, so something like that might be a way to get you going.
That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually going through Growing Together with an older woman and then also with a small group of girls. I lead our young adult women's ministry at our church. And so this group is mostly new believers. They're single, lower 20s. And so a lot of them, through the chapter about the local church, we did a spiritual gifts assessment and just encouraged them to kind of plug in where their gifting is. A lot of them actually have the spiritual gift of shepherding. And so what are some good opportunities to provide young adult women in the church with the gift of shepherding, particularly if they are not on church staff?
That's good. That's really good. I think shepherding can, take a lot of different viewpoints. In some ways, it can be just a ministry of care. So I think of a younger woman, in the church, there always one younger women to be shepherding. So I love the 20-somethings in my church who have invested in my 16-year-old daughter. It means so much to me. Like, I have this one girl who's now been taking my daughter to lunch. She's just been caretaking my daughter, and I say thank you because, sometimes she does not want to listen to me. She doesn't want to be shepherded by me. But these women who are pouring back in, it means so much. But I also think, can I just say this to all of us in the church? Our pastors are really discouraged, and shepherding can go upward. And what I mean by that is maybe it's, hey, let's make cookies for our pastoral team and take them in. We can shepherd that way. You can text or email or whatever way appropriate your pastor and say, hey, I want to pray for our church well. Prayer is shepherding. I want to do that. So I think even be creative about, how can I love this church well, even holistically? Because I think prayer is something that everyone can do if you're, 5 years old in the church and it's a shepherding ministry, or if you're, 88 in the church. We can all do that.
We are a minute over, but you have been standing there, so
Yes.
we want to hear
Last
it.
question.
We want to hear it.
I have a great women's leadership team for a women's ministry. They're getting to an age where they're looking for younger leadership to step up, and everyone seems maxed out. Any wisdom?
Yes, this is like I love this. You have to create space at the table. We cannot keep the leadership in a certain age demographic and then think, why are the younger women not showing up? They need a seat at the table. They need to be on the teaching team with a lot of feedback. They need to be in the decision making. We need to be saying, why is nobody coming to the retreats anymore? Why is nobody coming to the Bible studies anymore? And our 20-year-old sisters are going to have a lot of wisdom on that.
Yeah.
And so give whatever demographic is missing from any part of your women's ministry, look and see, are they at the table? And create a space for them there.
That's great closing wisdom.
Okay. Thank you all
Thanks,
so much.
everyone.